Bonelab will never be better than Blade and Sorcery. So let me explain. Blade and Sorcery just announced the U12 roadmap, the last official update before the game gets fully released, and it destroys the only thing Bonelab had over it. If you're wondering, yeah, it's the in-game mod manager. Bonelab has had a good hold over Blade and Sorcery in this regard for 3 entire weeks until Blade and Sorcery revealed they've been working on the exact same thing for U12 or the full release of the game. In my expert opinion as a VR content creator and game modder for Blade and Sorcery and other games for the last 3 years, Bonelab will now never have anything better than Blade and Sorcery. Bonelab has the mod manager, so will Blade and Sorcery. Bonelab has a campaign, however small it may be, so will Blade and Sorcery. Unlike Bonelab, Blade and Sorcery offers a unique perspective onto many other things such as spells and abilities. Now, here's the kicker. Now, I know they're both different games with different purposes, but ultimately, the main appeal of each is that they're a moddable sandbox fighting game. Off the bat, Blade and Sorcery melee combat is 1,000 times better than Bonelab, maybe even more than that. Bonelab fighting is honestly one of the worst experiences I've had in VR. Feedback just isn't there, and it's so bland. Honestly, it reminds me of trying to taste food while you have COVID. On the other hand, their firearm combat rivals giant titles such as Pavlov and Contractors VR. It really is something incredible, and it's a ton of fun. After those few comments, it's probably a good idea to do a direct comparison between Blade and Sorcery and Bonelab. Now, I'm going to be putting everything into a T-chart right here so you guys can see all my opinions that may or may not agree with the majority of both communities. So let's get started. Without further ado, we have Blade and Sorcery, which in my opinion we have melee, graphics, climbing, modding, multiplayer, item handling, and abilities that are all better than Bonelab. But I will say Bonelab has a few things that I deem are better. So at this moment they have avatars, a story, firearms, and a native mod manager. Now in comparison to Blade and Sorcery will be getting its very own story at some point, and it will be getting its own native mod manager. I'm not entirely sure how long it will take for both of them, but stay tuned for the next updates on that. And going over all these again, melee just feels a ton better in Blade and Sorcery, especially with all the different audios for colliding with different elements on the battlefield. Graphics are a ton better and a lot more crisp. Climbing just feels a ton better than Bonelab. Bonelab, it just feels like you're lifting a dummy up the entire time and there's a ton of weight behind you, which I guess it's considered more realistic, but in a virtual reality game, it doesn't feel good the way that Blade and Sorcery does. Now, I know modding has been around for Blade and Sorcery for the last couple of years and the community's been built around that, but hear me out. It really is just so much better, and quite honestly, from the interactions that I've had with the Bonelab modding community and community in general, Blade and Sorcery's community plus modding community seems to be a lot better. And I don't just mean the ability of the modders, but the positivity of them as well. I'm not going to go too much more in depth. You guys get the idea, hopefully. Blade and Sorcery and Bonelab both have a multiplayer mod now, which I think is absolutely incredible, being able to play with your friends. So hats off to both communities. At this very moment, I do believe the Blade and Sorcery one is better. It just seems to handle a lot better. It seems to drop less frames when we're playing with our friends, and interactions between objects or players just feels a ton better as well. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard one of my previous videos where I talked about how bad the handling is in Bonelab. Now, I know what you guys are going to say, that item handling isn't too big of a deal, especially with modding, because you can change it and edit it exactly how you like. Now, in Bonelab, this hasn't been done yet. In Blade and Sorcery, it has. I'm actually one of the guys that made those mods, which is called Fast Weapon Handling, by the way, if you want to check it out. But handling weapons single-handed and dual-wielding in Bonelab, it honestly feels horrible. I get weapons are supposed to have mass and drag to them because it's a physics-based game. They're supposed to have that. It's real life, right? But tell me why they feel so bad in comparison to Blade and Sorcery. And talking about the abilities, in Blade and Sorcery, I'm mainly talking about the spells and telekinesis. Bonelab really doesn't have much, except I guess you could consider an ability as changing your avatar, which allows you to change the abilities that the avatar has. All I can tell you guys is that the spells in Blade and Sorcery provide a unique aspect to the game, which honestly, just the spells alone make it better than Bonelab in my opinion, just because of the cool things that we can do. I know that's a personal opinion for me, and I'm trying to make this video as unbiased as possible, but being able to cast spells and use magical powers is something I think is really cool. So yeah, it's a physics-based game where you can cast abilities, and yeah, that may be a little bit different than Bonelab, but still basically the same kind of game And now for Bonelab. So I will let you guys know I do think Bonelab has a few things over Blade and Sorcery, mainly the avatars, the story, the firearms, the native mod manager, the inventory, and the enemy variation. Now I know Blade and Sorcery is getting a story and their own native mod manager, so I can ignore those for now. But in terms of the avatars, for me it is a close call because yeah, in Bonelab you can mod in all the avatars you want, but we're not talking about mods right now. With the base game avatars, there are a couple that you can choose from with a couple different abilities, which yeah, super cool. But we can't customize those in any way that we want. Now, with Blade and Sorcery's most recent update 11.4, we can customize our characters. We can choose a couple different races, change the colors on the characters, color on the hair, tints, etc. It's very, very cool, and in my opinion allows for a more unique player experience. Now, firearms, Blade and Sorcery obviously has no firearms, so Bonelab is definitely better in that regard. I will let you guys know that Blade and Sorcery has bow and arrow. That's about it. Hopefully in the future, Bowtie or one of the other developers will be adding in a crossbow. I think that'd be a super cool addition. But in terms of what they have now, Bonelab with its several dozen firearms and items, Blade and Sorcery can't compare to that. And talking about the inventory like it did previously, Blade and Sorcery has one and it's kind of cool. It's just, in my personal opinion, it's too complicated. I like Bonelab's inventory because it's super simplistic, it works very easily, and there's no issues with it. There's a bunch of different options when we're actually in the Blade and Sorcery inventory too, which in my opinion is just a bit clunky, and I don't like it all that much. Nor have I really used it ever either. And last but not least, the enemy variation in Bonelab is absurdly awesome. Now, I'm sure you guys have tried out Bonelab, and if you haven't, you've seen all the avatars that they have. Now, there's over a dozen different enemy variations that you can fight. A bunch of them have different abilities, and overall, the combat is just a lot of fun. I love the fact that there's different enemies to fight. I will let you guys know though that Blade and Sorcery has different enemy variations than Bonelab. Now what Blade and Sorcery does is they add different armors onto the enemies. And yeah, they're all humans, but some of them have knight armor, gladiator, bandit. You can mix and match all the sets. There's a couple different variations to each of the armors, and overall it's very cool the fact that you can fight all these enemies at once with them having completely different looks on their faces because they're races, which again I'd say is a fantastic addition to Blade and Sorcery. Plus all the different armor variations as well makes combat very, very enjoyable. And to answer the title of this video, I do find Blade and Sorcery to be superior to Bonelab, mainly because of the modding. Now I know there's been a community for Blade and Sorcery that's built up for the last couple of years, but at the moment, Blade and Sorcery blows Bonelab out of the water with the modding community, and in my personal opinion, as a content creator and as a modder for VR games and games in general, Bonelab will never be better than Blade and Sorcery. But I think that's it, guys. So whether you agree or disagree, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, but I think that's it. So if you guys like this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It helps out the channel a ton. Thanks for watching.